Okay, we can go ahead and get started.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. We are right at the top of the hour, right on time. Hopefully, everyone here has had an amazing day, heard some really good sessions. One of the great things about today is, I mean, amazing speakers, really good topics. So, for me, my plan is really just to bring it all together to talk about what are some of the things that we're seeing, what are the trends, what are some of the things as we look out the future. So, just want to do a quick introduction. My name is Stephen Kaufman. I am a chief architect at Microsoft, and I focus on AI, as right now everybody is, but AI, app dev, and the let's call it the end-to-end complete architecture that goes with that. So, a lot of what I will talk about will be really looking at the why, the drivers, what are some of the technical things that we're dealing with. Um, I'll also talk about one of the questions from this morning around MCP and A to A. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But the first thing that I wanted to really dive into is there is so much that's happening in this area. And one of the questions that we always hear is, it's moving too fast. Why is it moving so fast? How am I going to keep up? What are the things that I need to be thinking about? And I think that part of this is there is a lot of interest. There is a lot of capability that comes with the technology. And every time we have this kind of technical, I'm going to call it an evolution, there's a lot of things that, a lot of questions that come up, a lot of how is this different than what was before, or what is different, or how is this going to help me solve problems differently? So when we've got, about 93% of organizations that are implementing and experimenting with multiple models, there's a lot of things that are going on there when it's that type of an implementation and a number. And 50% are looking at agentic AI pilots. Now, POCs by 2027, it's really a trend where it's, yes, we want it. Yes, we think it's going to do some amazing things, but what is it going to do? How do we figure out what it's going to do? And who's going to be doing that for us? So, part of the conversation that comes up is how do we target the people that are going to be doing this? And is this one of those things where we are only going to let professional developers do this? Or we're going to split across low code and pro code? And there's some decisions that need to be made. And so part of it is what within the organization or within the organizations that you guys are working with, who are the types of people that are working on activities where agents are going to help them? And one of the, well, I'm going to say the great things about agents is that I can go create agents that are created in low code. I can create them in pro code. I can interact with them across different environments. And so now it's more about what am I creating the agent to do? Who's going to be using it? So if I've got somebody who is and I'm going to kind of go across the personas of this and I'll let you guys read some of this, but if I've got somebody who is a power user, right? Somebody who really can take advantage of the Power Platform of Copilot Studio. They can be as productive in creating agents that work very well for them or for work groups. And that can be something that is now shared and utilized and helping them be more efficient, even creative. Now, you've also got a group that are the IT professionals. How are they using agents? And what are the things that they're going to do with agents to help them with the activities that they do around keeping the system up and running? Reviewing logs, looking for anomalies, going in and looking at the activities even around I'm going to say DevOps, right? So we can have a discussion if that's an IT professional, if we've got developers and admins, operators, et cetera. But we are seeing a lot of agentic development with the DevOps process. And so those things where we are really looking at how to be efficient in that scope of what the persona or the person does as part of their day-to-day activity. And then the other is really that code first developer, right? That pro developer that is looking at how do we bring agents into an application or into a suite. And so I'm going to have a project that has multiple agents or a multi-agent system that's using workflow to control the agents versus I have a number of just different agents that are doing things within my scenario. So one of the things that comes into play is, where does governance come in? What is it that I'm doing that says, here are the guardrails, here are our guidelines, here are the things that we want you to do and don't want you to do. And along with governance is keeping track of the agents that are created. So if I have low-code developers that are out there creating agents, great. What are they creating? Are they sharing them? Should they be shared? If I've got code-first developers creating agents, okay, is that part of a solution? Are they creating the agents within a solution by itself rather than to put into an existing application? And is that solution now going to be shared or deployed? And how does that interact? So part of that governance is keeping track of the agents. Who's using them? Are they being used still? All of those types of things. So there's work that needs to be done there. But one of the things that really comes into play is that everybody has that ability to go create an agent today to really enhance what they're doing. And so don't just think about it in one environment or another environment. Think about it about how can somebody be that much more efficient to be able to create the agents to guide them and to do the things that we do. Now, one of the things that I put into a lot of my slide decks now is this alignment guide. And I put this in because there tends to be a lot of questions around, well, which environment do I go with? And I've got a customer that said, we're a low code shop. We are only doing low code. Everything will be done in low code. Okay, I understand where they're coming from, but that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. And so part of that was really making sure that they were aligned on which tool works best for which type of persona, in what type of environment, with what type of users. So as we think about agents, and we think about what is different between an agent and a co-pilot, right? A co-pilot is something that is interactive, that's helping us with a task. An agent tends to be something that is autonomous, triggered by something that starts up and does an activity. So on the left-hand side of the screen, I have more out-of-the-box value because those have already been created. I can just go up and I can start working with them. Now, I don't have a lot of customization, but as we start to move towards the right and I get into Copilot Studio, I have still out-of-the-box value, but a little bit more customization. But I also have some guardrails. When I get into AI Foundry, I have a lot of customization that I can do, a lot of tools, a lot of things that I can be very specific about how I implement it. But with great power, right? What do we all know? With great power comes great responsibility. So as a developer of agents within AI Foundry, we have to make sure that we're using the services that are available to us so that we put in place things like checking for prompt attacks, monitoring, all of the things that we've come to know from creating solutions, that we're putting those things into our creation. Now, with that customization also comes a lot of choices. Well, actually, across a lot of it comes a lot of choices, but let's talk about those choices, because when I am doing something within Copilot, Copilot has a ton of connectors. And very quickly, I can connect to things that are in M365, for an example. So that entire suite. I can be connecting to different types of systems for doing that type of knowledge interaction. I can be up and running very quickly as I create my agent with all of those connectors and the things that I do in Copilot Studio. When I come into AI Foundry, I have over 1,800 models that I can choose from. Now, some of them are going to be ones that we continue to use over and over. But the other is that I can start to add multiple models to my agents, to my solution. I might have calls to a model to help me create my prompt and another one that actually runs the prompt. There's all kinds of different patterns and variations that come into play. But the other thing that I want to talk about at the very bottom of this AI Foundry part are these specialized models. And so that's the other thing that we get to choose from is, Valerie this morning was talking about multimodal applications. Well, there's the content understanding service, which helps us with multimodal applications, so that if I want to be working with a model that has already been trained, I'm going to call it a service that's already used a model that's been trained, I'm already that much further ahead than if I just go to a generic model and I have to create all the prompts and I have to do all of the things myself. So part of what I want you thinking about in the future is, what is the model that I'm going to use? Do I need a generic model? Do I need a small, the small language model like Phi? Or do I need a specialized model? So don't just assume, hey, everything I'm going to do is going to be in Llama or going to be in Cohere or going to be in OpenAI. Pick the models that make sense. The other is that when I look across the bottom, I have things like Prompt Shield. I have grounded detection, content safety, the prompt flow evaluation SDK. There's going to be a lot of things in those areas announced at Build coming up towards the end of May. So that's another area where there's a lot of work being done. So make sure that we're picking the right pieces for the right parts, and then also making sure that we are allowing all of the different tools to come into play as we build out the things that we're going to build out. Now, the other part that I want to talk about is that as we look at the evolution of building out what we're going to do with our AI solutions, and whether we have a direct model like what we do today, where I have a call out to a model, I give it a prompt, I get a response back, to creating agents or agentic AI and creating agentic systems. So this is something I think that really helps put things into perspective, because I may have an agent, I may create an agent. That agent may not necessarily equate to me having an agentic system. And so I want to make that distinction, because there is a level of progression that starts here. And so in the bottom corner, we're already familiar with remote process automation. We're already familiar with bots. So I'm not going to talk that much about that. It's really this middle. Over the last couple of years, we have been immersed in AI assistants, what AI assistants can do, how we create them, how we create RAG solutions. And that has been a very big focus. Now it's, how do we go to that next iteration or generation around creating AI agents, where I talked about the fact that they are self-directed, they are connected to tools, and we'll talk about MCP in a minute. I can have a self-directed autonomous agent doing something on my behalf. That is the stepping stone to me creating what might be an agentic AI system. And that's where we get into multiple agents that are part of a workflow, that is part of a plan that is using reasoning to map through the activities that those agents are doing. And so I'm not necessarily doing what we used to do with going in and creating a rules engine with very hard-coded sets of instructions for the path through the workflow. But now I'm using the large language model to do that work for me. And so that's where we get into things like semantic kernel and autogen and creating that workflow as well as the agents that are part of that workflow. And I want to make that distinction because the tools that we end up using, the frameworks, the SDKs, that starts to change as we move, or the way that I'm using them starts to change as we move from bubble to bubble. Now, that opens up a lot of capabilities. It opens up a lot of options and a lot of decisions. And so a lot of what we end up doing is trying to put together some level of a decision tree. What are we going to use depending on the type of thing that we are going to build? And so, do we start with an agent in M365 Copilot? Okay, maybe. Now, how do we figure out where are we going to do that? Are we doing that through the M365 Agents SDK, through Copilot Studio? What does that look like as we deploy that? Versus, am I going to create something that is done in AI Foundry that is code first? Am I using the Agent Service SDK? Am I using semantic kernel? Am I using some of these other frameworks? So that starts to get into some of the governance, right? What are the things that we're going to do? How are we going to make those decisions? And what are the tools that have been approved, or what are the tools that are not approved? And that is a very important aspect as well. So I have customers that are very specific about which orchestration tool they will use or allow in proof of concepts and which ones they will allow in production, and they're not the same. So when you start to put things into production, there's another set of activities that we have to think about. We have to think about support. We have to think about all of the things that come with monitoring and telemetry and interactivity. So who's creating the updates? If there's a bug, do you have to go in and make the change to the bug, or is there somebody else who is doing that and providing you an SDK or a framework? So as much about what tools are we using, it's important to also know which tools are we going to limit, or are we going to make sure that are on our selected or no-go types of tools. Now, I've talked about governance a number of times. One of the things I want you thinking about is that AI agents, they're in your network, right? They are doing things on your behalf. Do you know where those agents are? Do you know what those agents are doing? Do you know if those agents are still being used? So now, does that mean we have to keep a repository of all the agents that we've created? Maybe. Do we have to do things that say, hey, I know what agents are out on my network, and we have put things in place to make sure that I don't have agent sprawl? That's another aspect. So as we think about who's creating agents and how many licenses have I provided to everybody in my organization, and are they all going and creating an agent? Should they be able to all go create an agent? So those are things that I want you to be thinking about after everything that you've heard today. Now, the other aspect of this is as I start creating more complex solutions, or as I start creating solutions that have multiple agents that need to interact, how do I start to do that? Now, some of that we are doing today, right? So if I pick on semantic kernel, I can move messages or move information from an agent up to the orchestrator back down to another agent. I can do that. I have to do it by hand. I have to control it, but I can do that. So when we get into agent communications, it's as much about communicating between the agents as it is to connect to knowledge. Now, that's the other piece, right? So I talked about connectors in Copilot Studio and the Power Platform. Those connectors have been created to allow me within my environment to connect to some, let's call it a backend source, whatever that backend source is. Now, that's exactly where MCP comes into play. MCP, the Model Context Protocol, comes into play because it was specifically written to be an open protocol that lets us connect to our tools or our data sources. Now, our tools are other systems, right? Those other systems might be a ticketing system. It might be an ERP system. It might be GitHub, right? It's other systems that I need to interact with. And now I have that standard protocol to be able to connect. And one of the things I said this morning was that ability to connect, and I'm going to let this video play so you guys can see what this looks like, but to connect in a client-server mode where your agent is the client, the tool is essentially exposed as a server, and you are connecting to that to be able to exchange data back and forth. Now, what this video is showing is how that's already built into a lot of the tools that you're using today. MCP got integrated into a tremendous amount of the Microsoft tools very quickly, and you will see more and more of that taking place. Now, one of the things we have to be thinking about is security. How am I securing the tool, right? So that back-end system, how am I securing that communication between client and server? Today, that isn't there. Now, it will be, and it will be very shortly, but that's where we use things like APIM as a gateway to be able to add that security into that environment. So be thinking about that as you put together your architecture. But the other is that here are a number of different things that very quickly had MCP integrated into it. And so just out of the box today, we can start connecting, we can start working with that. And again, whether I'm doing that through Visual Studio Code, or I'm doing that through Copilot Studio. So that is a tremendous amount of capabilities that we can start to write agents against these services, and we don't have to think about that connectivity. Now, the other part is Google's agent-to-agent protocol. This is really focused on how do I communicate between agents and do that in a way where they can communicate no matter what the underlying technology is. So that is a very important aspect, especially as I may have different agents that are being brought together. Maybe it's different teams, maybe it's across different organizations or organizational silos coming together. But that becomes an important aspect. Now, MCP and A2A are focusing on two very different, I'm going to call them areas of communication. There are going to be places where they are both there. There may be areas where I'm only using MCP, and that's fine, right? That's not a problem. But we will start to see a lot more integration of A2A, and primarily because this is another area where the benefits of being able to communicate with those other agents, no matter what the underlying technology is a problem that people are dealing with. And so, more than 50 partners have already come on as implementers of the A to A protocol. And then I've got the link here for how do you integrate Google's A to A protocol into semantic kernel. Again, we will start to see a lot more of that get integrated into the tools. But if that's something that you want to look at now, that's the guidance that is coming out on how to do that. Now, hopefully that gives a good background on what the two tools are, but I want to compare and contrast a little bit because I want to make sure that people really understand that you may have both. In A to A, it is that application level communication. You're not going to use it to connect to tools. That's not that's not the reason that it was created. And that's where you're going to use MCP. It defines a structured message, right? Just like we would hope for. There probably are a lot of things that you have heard today, that you've read, that you're going to hear, where you can see a lot of similarities between what we were doing with microservices and now what we're doing with agents. And there's a lot of similarities in the patterns. What are the patterns and anti-patterns for how microservices communicated with each other? And how did you make sure that you weren't having two microservices directly connect, creating a hard connection, which meant that now I had a deployment and a versioning problem? So now how do we use some of these protocols to make it so that we don't repeat those same mistakes or have those same issues with agents that we had with microservices? On the MCP side, it is all about how do we connect to those external resources. And that's the important part. It's that external resource. So what I will say is somewhat of a cautionary tale is be careful with what you download for what services say that they are MCP compliant. Because over the last couple of weeks, everybody has rushed to have an MCP server library or server exposed to connect to their system. There are also a lot of organizations, I'm going to call them organizations, and I'm putting air quotes around organizations, that are putting out MCP servers that were not created by the manufacturer of that backend system. And so it is very easy to download something that is an MCP connector server that you may not necessarily know who's the owner of it or where it came from. And so it requires a little bit of extra due diligence to make sure that you really do pay attention to what you're downloading and implementing. Now, this was a tweet that I thought was fantastic from Sundar. To MCP or not to MCP? That is the question. I am a believer that it is not about to MCP or not to MCP. It is where do you MCP? You will end up MCPing because you are going to connect to those back-end external tools. So if you haven't started playing with MCP, go learn it. Again, it's a straightforward paradigm because it is that client server type of a paradigm. But the majority of implementations will end up using MCP. And so that's really where this comes in, is that you will see MCP really being brought into just about everything that we're doing. And you will start to see that across the board with other providers as well. Okay, so I want to do a little bit of a context switch. I talked a little bit about security and security with MCP and what does that mean, right? What's there or not there now? What are some of the things that we will start to see? I want to make sure that you're aware of that, though, because, again, I always want you thinking about security implementation or I'm going to say access and all of the things that come around with security. And one of the pieces with security is it's not just security access to the agent, it's also security access of what the agent can access perhaps on your behalf or on behalf of whatever identity you provide to that agent. So what that means is that, let's say that I create an agent that's going to do something on my behalf for me, productivity agent of some sort. Well, now I'm going to connect it to data sources. I'm going to connect it to SharePoint. I'm going to connect it to whatever other repository. And let's say that I was on a specific team within my organization, and I just switched teams. Now, does my organization have the governance policies in place that when I switched teams, they went back to go clean up all of my access so that I no longer had access after that move? Or do I still have access? Because when I create an agent, that agent, if it's acting on behalf of me, it's going to have access to whatever documents, whatever information that I have access to. And if I haven't cleaned up that access, that means that I'm now going to be getting data from my new team and data from my old team. And I may not have, or should not, have rights to get to that data. And so now that starts to raise alarm bells, and everybody says, oh, we have a security issue. Or, oh, you know what? We can't do this because we don't have the security in place to lock this down. We want to make sure that we are not generating a problem from the solution that we're trying to create. And so make sure that all of the things are in place to make sure that we're thinking about, in this case, that example of that security. Now, I also want to talk about some of the other things that come up at the security discussions that take place. This is just a sample of things, but the things that we were used to having in traditional security, right? Identity and access security, network security, data security, we're very well familiar with all of those things. We've added on to those things for AI security, right? Prompt injection, jailbreaking, accountability, all of those types of things that we had to now be thinking about that we weren't before. Here are a whole other set of things that now that we deal with agents, I have to be thinking about these things. When I talked about the orchestration layer, what is that flow through the system? Can somebody manipulate it? Or do I have the ability to see what was there so that I can keep track and trace what was done? So if somebody says, hey, we had an issue, we had a breach, we had a whatever, I can go back and I can say, okay, for that transaction at that time, I can see that this is the path that that agent or agentic system took. How do I make sure that I am not dealing with agent impersonation or provisioning poisoning, right? So if I've got a registry, I was talking to a customer this afternoon who wants to auto deploy agents and have them register into the workflow or into the system to now start taking place dynamically as part of their workflow. Okay, really cool. But who's publishing that agent? How do we know that that is a trusted agent? What are we putting in place to make sure that we don't have somebody putting in malicious agents to do things? Those are things that we didn't necessarily need to do before. The human in the loop or the human on the loop. Make sure that you are incorporating those two things. Human in the loop is I am part of that process and I either okay or deny or give some piece of information that may redirect that path. Versus the human on the loop means I can watch everything that's happening from end to end. And I have the ability, by watching what's happening on the top, to stop what's happening. So that if I look at all of the activities and I'm looking at my logs in real time, and I see that, hey, this is not doing what I'm expecting it to do, I can shut it down. That's the human on the loop. You have to make sure that you incorporate that aspect into every solution. So those are things that we talk about now as part of an agentic AI solution. Now, when we look across the spectrum, where are those places that we do have things that we have to be more focused on? Or maybe other things that maybe not as focused on, but maybe there's tools that are available for that. But anywhere where there's this kind of reddish pink color, those are areas that are going to need a little bit more focus as we look at the high and the very high. So I'm not going to go into every single one of these because I want to make sure that you guys, you'll have access to these, but I want to make sure that you guys are thinking about what are those things that I need to be putting into my project plans, making sure that we have the architecture in place for all of these aspects, and that we're thinking about this as part of any solution. Now, as you build out your solution, as you build out your architecture, one of the questions comes up, okay, where is this going? What are those things that we're doing today that I need to be thinking about what's happening tomorrow or what's coming out tomorrow? And that's that future direction. And that's where I'm going to focus for the last 4 minutes of what I'm going to talk about before we go into a Q&A panel. So when we think about the future direction, you're going to see that not only in the industry, but through a lot of the different providers. And as you watch Build at the end of May, you are going to see a lot about these 3 areas. And these 3 areas are the things that we're doing today, where it's an interaction with AI that is doing something where I provide a prompt. We're very, very comfortable, I'm hoping, now with that. Then it's about how do we move to that single agent that is controlled by me or working on my behalf, that is doing something that I need done. I'm creating an agent. I might create multiple agents, but are each separate doing their own task. And that is where we are seeing a lot of focus now around the tooling, around marketing, around competition. That is, in essence, where we are kind of today. Now, that doesn't mean that the simple or straightforward interaction between user and model is going away. It's just that that is a pattern that we are now mostly comfortable with. The single agent is what we should be getting comfortable with as we move to multi-agent systems. And that's where we have many agents that are interacting to do a process, a workflow, an end-to-end set of activities where I may have a lot of single agents doing things. I may have a number of multi-agent systems doing things. But when I get to that environment, what happens is that I am not being replaced. I'm not being replaced as a developer. I'm not being replaced in my position. I'm changing what I'm doing where now I become an agent boss. I now have a set of agent employees, if you will, that are doing things to make me better, more efficient, more effective in what I do. And that's where we are going to. That's what that next step is. And it's how do we automate that? How do we break down each of those activities within a workflow to get to that point where I can now start to automate that through agents, making me the agent, you, each one of us, the agent boss over all of our agents that really bring all of what we've heard today together to make us more efficient. So hopefully that gives you a kind of a walk across a number of different topics, but sets us up for where this is all going next. So with that, I want to thank you all for joining. And let's have Q&A session and a discussion panel. Any questions so far on anything that you've heard? I appreciate the applause. Oh, one other thing. Please fill out your event survey before you go. That is very important. We want to make sure that everybody is doing that. I think I saw that in the chat. So please make sure you do that. One of the questions, when you speak to organizations who are further along in their AI journey, are there common patterns you see that they did early on to accelerate the growth or adoption or the business value? Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that I find is there are organizations that are, I'm going to say, losing their mind, thinking that this is all brand new, that everybody has to be reskilled, that everybody has to now start from scratch. And that's not the case. Companies that really are accelerating are building on the things that they did or the lessons that they learned from their microservices implementation. And they're starting to take that knowledge and bring it into this realm. So when we think about what goes into a single agent, okay, how many of us have done domain-driven design? That is still applicable with what we do here. The other part is that they are separating out the activities that they are doing for a proof of technology from a proof of concept for the business. The proof of technology, they may send a couple people to go say, hey, I need to go figure out what's the difference between LangChain, LangGraph, and semantic kernel, and which one are we going to use? Great. Send 2 people off for a couple days and let them go run. Separate that from the proof of concept where I have a business activity that I am now trying to figure out, can agents help in that business activity? And that proof of concept now becomes the proving point to show the business what this can do. And every time that businesses have seen something where they think that they can save money, they can do things faster, they can be more creative than their competition, all of a sudden they're all on board. And so things get a very different velocity at that point. When I think about the different roles that I see being needed in the future and what skills, the roles that I see, and maybe I'm going to back up. One of the things that I said is this technology is not going to replace me. It's not going to replace you. I'm going to put a little bit of a caveat on that. It's not that the technology is going to replace you. It's that you need to be using these technologies to enhance the things that you're doing. Because as your organizations, and as the organizations that everybody supports, right, if you're consultants or whatever else, as they start bringing on people who know the AI tools and are using these tools, they are more efficient than you are if you're not learning this. And that's what's going to be with the replacement. Somebody else who is better, faster, more able to do this is going to be getting promoted, is going to be getting the new activities. So incorporate what you've learned today and all of these activities into everything that you're doing. I didn't even talk about GitHub Copilot as an example. Right? Satya just came out yesterday and today are blended together, that said between 20 and 30% of the code that we're writing is being done alongside of GitHub Copilot. So one of the things that's happening within our internal organization, within our product groups, is that if you are not using AI to help do your work, you are falling behind. And we all know that Microsoft just announced that we are reducing headcount. That's one of the things that's happening is people who are not as efficient and not keeping up, they're not writing as much code. They're not writing as good of code. And so now, are you above or below the line? So how do you use this technology to help in the things that you do every single day? How many agents have you created to help you in what you do? Right? Be that agent boss. So that is what I'm going to say specifically around the role. The skills, just like everything else, right? Go incrementally learn the skills. Go learn what things you can do with prompts, right? For me personally, I'm a crappy prompt engineer. But I know that I can go use a large language model to tell it what I need to have it give me back a prompt that now I can go and modify to go put into the system. And now I've got a decent prompt. And so don't think that you have to be the best prompt engineer before you can go in and do this. Don't think that you have to be the best semantic kernel developer before you go start using semantic kernel. Understand the way that semantic kernel works and the patterns that it's doing, but start small. Go play with it. Go try it. For me, my background is pro dev. I've been spending a lot of time in Copilot Studio and the things with the Power Platform because it is so quick to go get an agent set up. If I'm going to be an agent boss, some of my agents are going to be done through Copilot Studio. Well, actually, I use Copilot Studio within Teams because that's the environment where I need some of the activities being done to help me. But that is the type of skill that go and play, go and try it.
Yeah, I want to echo that. For those of you that were in my session on Copilot Studio, the punchline, which I never explicitly stated, was that everything that I did was using the Copilot prompts in Copilot Studio, defining the workflows, even with the actions. And, every little bit of it could have been done with a prompt. It didn't require any development skills. So on the type of roles that I see being needed in the future, I'm strongly aligned with what you said. I think that people who are business analysts that don't think that they can develop applications might be the perfect people to build applications in the next 2 to 3 years. At least for, maybe not the most scalable applications that handling millions of invoices a month, but certainly for a lot of the low-hanging fruit that organizations are struggling with and can find really, really gratuitous ROI on it.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have a question for the group. Let's do a little bit of roundtable here. When you look, you ended your talk looking at the future. I want to look back the last 12 months for the first question. When each of you look back at the last 12 months and what you've been doing real world on the AI deployments, what's the single most unexpected challenge or pleasant surprise, I should say, that you've encountered? Mac, why don't you go first?
Holy smokes, you caught me off guard. The single most, repeat the last part of the question.
What is the single most unexpected challenge or pleasant surprise that you've encountered?
Within the world of AI, I mean, as a person who swears by enjoying high code, I was pleasantly surprised with when I dove into Power Platform. That said, it didn't come without its own fair share of expletives and getting used to that. But I did leverage AI and did leverage Copilot within Power Apps to help me build some stuff, and I was pleasantly surprised that when I could build an entire table in Power Platform using AI, that caught me by surprise, and I was pleasantly surprised with that, for sure.
Yeah, I'll just add one more. I think the other part that was a really pleasant surprise is, one of my customers needed to do quite a bit of creation of test data. And we used AI to go create Python code that would generate that test data.
Yes.
And so that Python code became a reusable component. So every time that they needed to do this, they could go modify different parameters and different configuration and it would spit out all kinds of linked data that they could test different parts of the system with and do end-to-end types of flow tests. And so that was one of those things that just amazing how quickly that took place. And I don't think that any of us spend enough time really testing our systems. And we test it, we make sure it works. But this made it so that now we didn't have any excuses. We had the test data. We could do it quickly.
Yeah.
We could change to different types of test data to try to break the system.
Nick, what about you?
Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, for me, I feel like leveraging, I guess, the effectiveness of using GitHub Copilot in VS Code has been a huge benefit. And one of the other things I like about it is it forces you, if you want a good result, it forces you to think through the process of what you're actually wanting the code to do and putting some thought in there. And then it generates the code for you. If you prompt it properly, it generates the code for you, and it really accelerates the development process. So if you're refactoring code, you're creating new code, I've been surprised at how well GitHub Copilot actually works when you frame it out and you have a thoughtful process. The other thing I would say is integrating business needs and requirements into the development process has been helped a lot by the combination of agents and GitHub Copilot. So for example, I master's degree in statistics, right? And I do data science. And I've been doing data science for a long time, projects. Well, we have responsible AI frameworks. And when you have the requirements for a model that, you want to understand what are the risks, use generative AI to help you ideate all the responsible AI risks. So you give it the framework, you give it the context of the project, and it helps you identify those a lot faster, and maybe things you didn't think of. And that makes the projects more robust. So better solutions. So those are, I think those two integrations are the things that I enjoy the most and have been pleasantly surprised about.
One other thing I wanted to add to that is I started using agent mode, and it really showed me the importance of good prompt engineering, but it also showed me just how good Copilot will be with taking some liberty and doing other things in agent mode. So I built a pretty quick prompt to just build effectively an API endpoint to CRUD. I think I chose Formula One race teams because I'm just a fan of Formula One. I didn't specify much, but it went ahead and built a .NET app. It used EF Core. It did all of the stuff. Albeit more than I wanted to, and then I was like, oh crap, I wanted to use Dapper, and and that's what it really drives home the importance of good prompt engineering. I said in my talk, it's a skill, kind of like Googling is. You will need to be good at it. Brian taught me a lot about prompt engineering. So yeah, it's that was a very pleasant surprise as well.
I'll go with my topic. So I go to Build every year, or just about every year, and it's a fantastic experience. You get to be introduced to a lot of the new things and technologies that are coming out. And over the years, it's been great. I got to see it. It's going to be 12 months until I can actually use it because it's going to be released in a preview, or it was, some experiment. You can do almost everything that I saw that was demoed and built last year. You were able to do 2 to 3 months, later. It was just fantastic, and I'm really excited for Build to come up in a couple of weeks. I'll be out there again. It wasn't vaporware. Pleasant surprise.
There's a question in the chat. It says, any thoughts on how AI is going to affect UI UX? And I have a thought, and it's similar to what we talked about responsible AI, but what you can imagine this scenario where you have standards and principles for UI and UX. Maybe your company has specific standards. There are UIX principles. They're in documents, and you use a multimodal model to look at the requirements that you've documented, and then for the project, what you're trying to achieve, the functionality of the specific UI and UApp, and then you give it an image of that app, and it can point out deficiencies or recommendations for how to improve the UI UX right there. And so that doesn't replace UI UX experts. However, you could, I mean, not every project is huge and warrants, really extensive UI UX, but if the project is, you can actually make the minimum standard for UI and UX a little bit higher by leveraging AI agents. And it could also, maybe you point out some stuff and then, maybe you do take it to a UIX person, or you have your UIX experts, professionals use that AI agent. But I think it can kind of give a little bit of firepower to the developers or the folks who are working, or the business analysts can give you some of that feedback.
I think the other part is that, when we think about Teams now becomes UI UX, right? I don't necessarily have to have a custom front end for it. So again, it depends on the use case. It depends where we're using it. There are going to be agents that are used within existing solutions. I did a project for one of the big four accounting companies, and they were putting agents into their auditing software, and the end user had no idea that agents were even there. But they were working behind the scenes, and the application itself was the UI for those agents. So
I'll throw a different perspective on it, because I'm going to take the UI out of it, and say that I truly believe that UX is even more important with these new technologies than it was before. I think when you're interacting with a lot of these agents, whether it's on my phone and talking to Siri or ChatGPT, there's an emotional response to that, and almost feeling like you're speaking to another human. So you have to be more conscientious about the persona and the interactions. And they're not UI driven, they're emotional driven. And I think it's an overlooked aspect of it, and something that here at Concurrency that we built into the process, and is really important for people to consider what the impact of these technologies are going to be for your customers.
Agreed.
Any thoughts on your use of AI tools for Web3? And Stephen, I'll let you go first because you've got a drop.
Yeah, I've actually got a drop, unfortunately, in 2 minutes. So do I have any thoughts on the use of our AI tools for Web3? I think that, yes, I think everything. I think that there are going to be a lot of things that come into play where you're going to have capabilities that come into play. You're going to have things that are there today, and some of the things that are coming. One of the things with having all of this be happening so fast is it's all about what are the things that I need to do now to get functionality? What are the things that is kind of that second wave, right? What are the things that help us with the integration, help us with the other aspects? And those will be additional things that keep coming up. So everything that we have today isn't everything. Sorry, the autogen piece. Let me talk about that real quick since I've got about 20 seconds left. Autogen, great tool. You will start to see a lot more of that capability, whether it is exactly as it is today or evolving. Pay attention at build. But there is a lot of great things in Autogen, and that's not going away. So I think that's my perspective on AutoGen. With that, everyone, I am sorry that I need to drop, but thank you all, and hope you guys all enjoyed the day, and talk with you soon.
Thanks, Stephen. All right, let's take how should we consider accessibility when developing agents? Nick or Mac, either one of you want to take this?
I think it's with many things in the business, your decisions are made based off your users, right? Whenever you're developing a system, a tool, you have to think about your end users. And so I think it depends on the accessibility uh, um, needs that you're trying to accommodate. I think that it does, there's a high level thing, like, so tool specific, yes, if you have specific users you want to, it's kind of like a BA analysis, like who are my users, what do they need? But there's also like a higher level thought of that these systems make, they make solutions available to a wider variety of people, and they can be used to help people who have accessibility needs.
Any other closing thoughts, Mac?
No, I mean, I when I think about it, how is it going to change? I actually might argue to some degree that the same considerations that you would make arguably are the same ones that you make today, and and you support multiple methods of interacting with the model, but most importantly, well, and also just in general, just making the intent clear and the usability clear enough. But then also, I think that's a question that is asked best or is answered best in the same way that you would do handle it from a UX perspective, and that's to involve that target audience, right? So if we are targeting certain elements of that accessibility, then I would say do that, is talk to those end users and see how it fits. And then the other thing, in the spirit of walking the talk, walking the walk and talking the talk, is prompting AI to do some of that thinking and help for you, and seeing how you can leverage that to help you get ahead in that regard.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody here. There's a link in the chat that Amy dropped in there. Fill out our virtual AI Summit survey. We are giving away a fantastic prize, so we're trying to bribe you with your feedback. But no, most importantly, we definitely want your feedback and whether you enjoyed it, and we should do it again. But thanks for everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Brian, and Nick and Mac for your presentations, and take care, everybody. Bye.